spoke. The two men left knots of conversation in their path, soft murmurs too low. Screamed, and balefire flew from his hands, molten light thicker than a man, driven by all the power he could draw. It struck the Forsaken, and Ravin ceased to exist. The Darkhounds in Rhuidean had become motes before they vanished. Whatever kind of life they had had struggling to continue, or the pattern struggling to maintain itself, even for them. Before this, Ravin simply ceased. Rand let the balefire die, pushed saidin away a little. Trying to blink away the purple afterimage, he stared up at the wide hole in the marble balustrade. The remains of one column of Fang above it, stared at the matching hole in the palace roof. They did not flicker, as if what he had done was too strong even for this place to mend. After everything, it seemed almost too easy. Perhaps there was something up there to convince him Ravin was really dead. He ran toward a door.
Frantically, Nynaeve threw everything into trying to close the flame tight around Ravin once more. The thought came that she should have used lightning. She was going to die. Those horrible eyes had fixed on Mogadin, not her, but she was going to die too. Liquid fire sliced up into the colonnade, so hot it made the fire she had made seem cool. Shock made her release her weaving, and she flung up a hand to protect her face. Yet before it had raised halfway, the liquid fire was gone. So was Ravin. She did not believe he had escaped. There had been an instant, so brief she could almost have imagined it, when that white bar touched him, and he became mist. Just an instant. She could have imagined, but she did not believe so. She drew a shuddering breath. Mogadin had her face in her hands, weeping, trembling. The one emotion Nynaeve sensed through the eidam was relief so powerful it drowned anything else. Hurried boots grated on the stairs below. Nynaeve spun, took a step toward the spiral staircase. She was surprised to realize she was drinking deeply of saidar, holding herself ready. That surprise faded when Rand climbed into sight. He was not as she remembered. His features were the same, but his face was hard. Blue ice made his eyes. The bloody rips in his coat and breeches, the blood on his face, seemed to suit that face. The way he looked, she would not be surprised if he killed Mogadin on the spot the instant he discovered who she was. Nynaeve had uses for her yet. He would recognize an eidam. Without another thought, she changed it. Let the leash vanish, leaving only the silver bracelet on her wrist and the collar on Mogadin. A moment of panic when she comprehended what she had done, then a sigh as she realized that she still felt the other woman. It worked exactly as Elaine had said it would. Perhaps he had not seen. She was between him and Mogadin. The leash had trailed behind her. He barely glanced at Mogadin. I thought about those flames coming up here. I thought it might have been you, or... Where is this? Is this where you meet Egwene? Looking up at him, Nynaeve tried not to swallow. So cold, that face. Rand, the wise ones say what you've done, what you are doing is dangerous, even evil. They say you lose something of yourself if you come here in the flesh. Some part of what makes you human. Do the wise ones know everything? He brushed past her and stood staring at the colonnade. I used to think Aes Sedai knew everything. It doesn't matter. I don't know how human the Dragon Reborn can afford to be.
Nice
Rand,
little
she did
piece of
not know
shatter.
what to say. Here, let me heal you at least. He held still for her to reach up and take his head in her hands. For her part, she had to suppress a wince. His fresh wounds were not serious, only numerous. What could have bitten him? She was sure most of these were bites. But the old wound, that half-healed, never-healing wound in his side, that was a sinkhole
Hey,
of
Christopher,
darkness,
how you doing?
a well filled with what she thought the taint of Saidin must be like. She channeled the complex flows, air and water, spirit, even fire and earth in small amounts that made up healing. He did not roar and flail about. He did not even blink. He shivered. That was all. Then he took her wrists and brought her hands down from his face. She was not reluctant. His new injuries were gone, every bite and scrape and bruise, but not the old wound. Nothing had changed about that. Anything short of death should be capable of being healed, even that.
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
Even that. Anything. Is he dead? He asked quietly. Did you see him die? He's dead, Rand. I saw. He nodded. But there are others still, aren't there? Other chosen. Nynaeve felt a stabbing sliver of fear from Moghedien, but she did not glance back. Rand, you must go. Ravin is dead, and this place is dangerous for you as you are. You must go and not come back here in the body. I will go. He did nothing that she could see or feel. Of course she could not. But for a moment she thought the hallway behind him had turned in some way. But it did not look any different. Except, she blinked. There was no half-gone column in the colonnade beyond him, no hole in the stone railing. He went on as if nothing had happened. Tell Elaine, ask her not to hate me. Ask her... Pain twisted his face. For a moment she saw the boy she had known, looking as though something precious was being ripped away from him. She reached out to comfort him, and he stepped back, his face stone again and bleak. Lan was right. Tell Elaine to forget me, Nynaeve. Tell her I've found something else to love and there's no room left for her. He wanted me to tell you the same thing. Lan has found someone else, too. He said for you to forget him. Better never to have been born than to love us. He stepped back again, 3 long steps. The hall seemed to turn dizzyingly with him in it, or part of the hall did, and he was gone. Nynaeve stared at where he had been, and not at the fitfully flickering reappearance of the damage to the colonnade. Lan had told him to say that. A remarkable man, Moghedien said softly. A very, very dangerous man. Nynaeve stared at her. Something new was coming through the bracelet to her. Fear was still there, but muted by expectation, is the best way to describe it. I have been helpful, have I not? Moghedien said. Ravin dead, Rand al'Thor saved. None of it would have been possible without me. Nynaeve understood now. Hope more than expectation. Sooner or later, Nynaeve would have to wake. The Idam would vanish. Moghedien was trying to remind her of her aid, as if it had not had to be wrenched out of her, just in case Nynaeve might be steeling herself to kill before she went. It is time for me to go, too, Nynaeve said. Moghedien's face did not alter, but fear strengthened, and so did hope. A large silver cup appeared in Nynaeve's hand, apparently filled with tea. Drink this. Moghedien edged back. What? Not poison. I could kill you easily enough without, if that was my aim. After all, what happens to you here is real in the waking world, too. Hope, much stronger than fear
Translation
now.
of what?
It will make you sleep.
Christopher.
A deep sleep. Too deep to touch Tel'aran'rhiod. It's called forkroot. Mogadin took the cup slowly. So I cannot follow you? I will not argue. She tipped back her head and swallowed until the cup was empty. Nynaeve watched her. That much should put her down quickly. Yet a cruel streak made her speak. She knew it was cruel and did not care. Mogadin should not have any quiet rest at all. You knew Birgitte was not dead? Mogadin's gaze narrowed slightly.
Je te souhaite une bonne soirée également.
He's narrowed slightly. You knew who Faolain is. The other woman's eyes tried to widen, but she was already drowsy. Nynaeve could feel the forkroot's effects spreading. She concentrated on Mogadin, held there in Tel Iran Riod. No easy sleep for one of the Forsaken. And you knew who Swan is, that she used to be the Amerlin seat. I've never mentioned that in Tel Iran Riod. Never. I'll see you very shortly. In Salidar. Mogadin's eyes rolled up her head. Nynaeve was not sure whether it was the forkroot or a feint, but it did not matter. She released the other woman, and Mogadin winked out. The silver collar rang as it hit the floor tiles. Elaine would be happy about that, at least. Nynaeve stepped out of the dream.
Rand trotted along the corridors of the palace. There seemed to be less damage than he remembered, but he did not really look. He strode out into the great courtyard at the front of the palace. Blasts of air knocked the tall gates half off their hinges. Beyond lay a huge oval plaza, and what he had been searching for. Trollocs and Myrddraal. Ravin was dead, and the other Forsaken were elsewhere, but there were Trollocs and Myrddraal to kill in Caemlyn. They were fighting, a milling mass of hundreds, perhaps thousands,
Hey,
surrounding
V-Woo,
something
how you
he could
doing?
not see through their black-mailed numbers, as tall
Hope
as a
you're doing
Myrddraal
well.
on its horse. Just barely he could make
Got
out
me
his
some,
crimson banner deep in
Other
the mist.
wax.
Some swung round
See
to
if I
face
can
the
show
palace
without
as the gates were
spilling
hurled
it.
asunder. Yet Rand stopped dead. Balls of fire rolled through the packed, black-mailed mass, and burning Trollocs lay everywhere. It could not be.
It's from a
Not
gas
daring to hope or
monkey.
think, he channeled.
It's
Shafts of balefire leaped from his hands as fast as he could weave them.
Kong's crown
Narrower than
jewel.
his little finger, precise, and cut off as soon as they struck. They were much less powerful than the one he had used against Ravin at the end.
That's
Than any he had
I
used
have a
against
bowl
Ravin.
loaded and I have
But he could not risk one slicing
bit of
through to
wax
those
on it,
trapped
too.
in the center of all those Trollocs. It made little difference. The first struck Myrddraal seemed to reverse colors, become a white-clad black shape. Then it was drifting motes that vanished as its horse fled madly. Trollocs, Myrddraal, everyone that turned toward him went the same. And then he began carving into the backs of those still facing the other way. So a continuous haze of sparkling dust
If
seemed
I were
to
to
fill
do
the air,
that, I'd have to
renewed as it evaporated.
purchase the book in
They could
that
not stand
language
against
and then
that.
play it that way.
Bestial cries of
possibly
rage
do that with a
turned to
different
howls
book.
of fear, and they fled in every direction except toward
But that would
him.
be the only way that I would be able
You
to
saw
do
one
it is
Myrddraal try to turn
purchase the
them,
book
and be trampled under, rider and horse.
under
But the rest
that
spurred their
language.
animals away. Rand let them go. He was busy staring at the veiled Aiel bursting out of their encirclement with spears and heavy-bladed knives. It was one of them carrying
Yeah.
the banner. Aiel
I got
did
this
not
new
carry
one in.
banners, but this one, a bit of red
It's a
headband
2
showing
grammer.
beneath the shufa, did.
And then, because it has
There were
that
battles
flavor,
going on
it's
down some of the streets leading from the plaza, too.
Java,
Aiel against
Tangerine,
Trollocs.
which is a
Townsfolk against
sativa,
Trollocs. Even
and
armored men in the
the
uniform
other
of the
one
Queen's
is
Guards against
Applejack.
Trollocs. Apparently,
And it
some
has,
were willing to kill a queen.
a
not
switch on the
stomach
bottom
Trollocs.
to where you can
Rand only
switch
barely
it,
noticed, though.
or you could
He was
hit them both
searching through the
together and it
Aiel.
becomes, what was it, a Jolly Rancher or something?
There. A woman in a white blouse, one hand holding up her bulky skirts as she slashed at a fleeing Trolloc with a short knife. An instant later, flames enveloped the bare-snouted figure. Avienda! Rand did not know he
You
was
know what,
running
before I
until he
smoke
shouted.
this, let's do a
Avienda!
dab of the new stuff.
And there was
Ugh.
Matt, coat torn and blood on his sword blade spear point, leaning on the black shaft, watching the Trollocs
Some
flee,
gas monkey.
content to let someone else do the fighting, now that that was possible. And Osmodian, sword held awkwardly, and tried to look the other way at once in case any Trolloc decided to turn back. Rand could sense Saidin in him, though weakly.
I got some loaded in
He
here
did not
already.
think much of Osmodian's fighting had been with that blade. Balefire. Balefire that burned a thread out of the pattern. The stronger that balefire was, the further back that burning went. And whatever that person had done, no longer had happened. He did not care if his blast at Ravin had unraveled half the pattern. Not if this was the result. He became aware of tears in his cheeks and let Saidin and the void go. He wanted to feel this. Avienda! Snatching her up, he whirled her around, with her staring down at him as if he had gone mad. He did not want to put her down, but he did. So he could hug Matt, or try to. Matt fended him off. What's the matter with you? You'd think you thought we were dead.
Cheers,
Not
Chris.
that we weren't, almost. Being a general has to be safer than this. You're alive, Rand laughed. He brushed back Avienda's hair. She had lost her headscarf, and it hung loose around her neck. I'm happy you're alive. That's all. He took in the plaza again, and his joy faded. Nothing could extinguish it, but the bodies lying in heaps where the Aiel had made their stand lessened it. Too many of them were not big enough to be men. There was Lamel, veil gone, and half her throat as well. She would never make him soup again. Heaven, both hands clutching the wrist that shoved the Trolloc spear through his chest, and the first expression on his face Rand had ever seen. Surprise. Balefire had cheated death for his friends, but not for others. Too many. Too many maidens. Take what you can have. Rejoice in what you can save. And do not mourn your losses too long. It was not his thought, but he took it. It seemed a good way to avoid going mad before the taint on Saidin drove him to it. Where did you go? Avienda demanded, not angrily. If anything, she looked relieved.
Je pourrais faire un livre comme ça, mais je devrais l'acheter dans cette langue.
Relieved. 1 second you were there, the next you were gone. I had to kill Ravin, he said quietly. She opened her mouth, but he put his fingers over it to silence her, then gently pushed her away. Take what you can have. Leave it at that. He's dead. Bale came limping up, Shupa still around his head, but veil hanging down his chest. There was blood on his thigh, and on the point of his one remaining spear as well. The Night Runners and Shadow Twisted are running, Karakarn. Some of the Wetlanders have joined the dance against them. Even some of the armored men, though they danced against us at first. Sulin was behind him, unveiled, a nasty red
Then
gash
I'll
across
hit
her
this
cheek.
one here a little bit too.
Hunt them down, however
Okay,
long
give
it
my
takes, Rand
lungs a
said.
break.
He began walking, not sure where, as long as it was away from Avienda. I don't want them loose on the countryside. Keep an eye on the guards. I'll find out later which of them was Ravin's men, and which... He walked on, talking and not looking back. Take what you can have. Chapter 56. The last chapter. Glowing embers. The high window had more than enough room for Rand to stand in it, stretching far above his head and clearing his shoulders by 2 feet to either side. Shirt sleeves rolled up, he stared down at one of the royal palace's gardens. Avienda was trailing her hand in the fountain's redstone basin, still intrigued by so much water with no purpose but to be looked at.
Je pourrais le faire si tu le voulais, en tant que demande spéciale.
But to be looked at and keep ornamental fish alive. She had been more than indignant at first when he told her she could not go chasing Trollocs through the streets. In fact, he was not sure she would be down there now, if not for a quiet escort of maidens that Sulin did not think he had noticed. Neither was he supposed to have heard the white-haired maiden remind her that
Nice.
she was Farderai's Mai no longer, and not yet a wise one.
Sour diesel is always a good
Coatless,
one.
but wearing his hat against the sun, Matt was sitting on the coping of the basin, talking to her. No doubt, probing for what she knew of whether the Aiel were preventing people from leaving. Even if Matt did decide to accept his fate, it was unlikely he would ever stop complaining about it. Asmodean sat on a bench in the shade of a red myrtle tree, playing his harp. Rand wondered whether the man knew what had happened or suspected. He should have no memory. For him, it never happened. But who could say what one of the Forsaken knew or could reason out? A polite cough turned him away from the garden. The window where he stood was a span and a half above the floor in the west wall of the throne room. The grand hall, where queens of Andor had received embassies and pronounced judgment for nearly 1,000 years. It was the only place he had thought he could be sure of watching Matt and Avienda unseen and undisturbed. Rows of white columns, 20 paces high, marched down the sides of the hall. The light from the tall windows in the walls mingled with colored light from great windows set in the arching ceiling. Windows
that
where the white
mouthpiece up.
lion alternated with portraits
Got a
of early
little
queens of the realm
resonated because I
and
have
scenes of great Andoran victories.
a mouthpiece on it that has a
The Nyla
screen.
and Samara did not
And
appear
that way
impressed.
it doesn't ash in your mouth.
Rand let himself down by his fingertips. Is there news from Vale? Inala shrugged. The hunt for Trollocs goes on. By her tone, the diminutive woman would have liked to be part of that. Samara's height made her seem even shorter. Some of the city people give aid. Most hide. The city gates are held. None of the Shadow-Twisted will escape, I think. But I fear some of the Night Runners may. Myrddraal were hard to kill, and just as hard to corner. Sometimes it was easy to believe the old tales that they rode shadows and could vanish by turning sideways. We brought you some...
Tu es sûr? Ce ne serait pas un problème.
We brought you some soup, Samara said, nodding her flaxen head toward a silver tray covered with a striped cloth, sitting on the dais that held the lion throne.
It's
Carved
pretty
and
good.
gilded,
It's
with huge lion's paws at the end of the legs.
it's a hitter.
The throne was a massive chair at the top of 4 white marble stairs, with a strip of red carpet leading up to it. A lion of Andor, picked out in moonstones on a field of rubies, would have stood above Morghase's head whenever she occupied that seat. Avienda says you have not eaten yet today. It is the soup Lamel used to make for you. I suppose none of the servants have come back? Rand sighed. One of the cooks, maybe? A helper? And Nyla shook her head scornfully. She would serve her time as Guy Shine with a good grace if it ever came to that. But the idea of anyone spending their entire life serving someone else disgusted her. Climbing the stairs, he squatted to twitch the cloth aside. His nose twitched, too. By the smell, whichever of them had made it was no better a cook than Lamel had been. The sound of a man's boots coming up the hall gave him an excuse to turn his back on the tray. With any luck, he would not have to eat it. The man approaching up the long red and white tiled floor was certainly no Andorman. In his short gray coat and those baggy trousers
Hey,
stuffed into
OG.
boots turned down at the knee. Slender, and only a head taller than Inila, he had a hooked beak
Hell
of a
yeah,
nose
OG.
and dark tilted eyes. Gray streaked his black hair and a thick mustache, like down-curved horns around his wide mouth. He paused to make a leg and bow slightly, handling the curved sword at his hip gracefully, despite the fact that, incongruously, he carried 2 silver goblets in one hand and a sealed pottery jar in the other. Forgive my intrusion, he said, but there was no one to announce me. His clothes might be plain and even travel-worn, but he had what appeared to be an ivory rod capped with a golden wolf's head thrust behind his sword belt. I am Davram Bashir, Marshal General of Saldaea. I am here to speak with the Lord Dragon, who rumors in the city say is here in the royal palace. I assume that I address him? For an instant, his eyes went to the glittering dragons, in gold around Rand's arms. I am Randolph Moore, Lord Bashir. The Dragon Reborn. Delilah and Samara had moved between Rand and the man, each with a hand on the hilt of her long-bladed knife, poised to veil. I am surprised to find a Saldaean lord in Camelin, much less wanting to speak to me. In truth, I rode to Camelin to speak
How
to
you been doing,
Morghese,
OG?
but I was put off by Lord Gabriel's toadies. King Gabriel, I should say. Or does he still live? Bashir's tone said he doubted it. I did not care one way or the other. He did not pause. Many in the city say Morghese is dead as well. They're both dead. Rand said quickly. He sat down on the throne, his head resting against the moonstone line of Andor. The throne had been prized for women. I killed Gabriel, but not before he killed Morghese. Bashir quirked an eyebrow. Should I hail King Rand of Andor, then? Rand leaned forward angrily.
Oh yeah, I'm about to take a
Andor
drink.
has always had a queen, and it still does. Elaine was daughter heir. With her mother dead, she is queen. Maybe she has to be crowned first. I don't know the law. But she is queen as far as I'm concerned. I am the Dragon Reborn. That is as much as I want and more. What is it you want of me, Lord Bashir? If his anger disturbed Bashir at all, the man gave no outward sign. Those tilted eyes watched Rand carefully, but not uneasily. The White Tower allowed Mazrim Taim to escape. The false dragon. He paused, then went on when Rand said nothing. Queen Tenobia did not want Saldaea troubled again. So I was sent to hunt him down once more and put an end to him. I have followed him south for many weeks. You need not fear I've brought a foreign army into Andor. Except for an escort of 10, the rest I left camped in Brame Wood, well north of any border Andor has claimed in 200 years. But Taim is in Andor. I am sure of it. Rand leaned back again, hesitating. You cannot have him, Lord Bashir. May I ask why not, my Lord Dragon? If you wish to use Aiel to hunt him, I have no objection. My men will remain in Brame Wood until I return. This part of his plan he had not meant to reveal so soon. Delay could be costly, but he had intended to have a firm hold on the nations first. Yet it might as well begin now. I am announcing an amnesty. I can channel Lord Bashir. Why should another man be hunted down and killed or gentled because he can do what I can? I will announce that any man who can touch the true source, any man who wants to learn, can come to me and have my protection. The last battle is coming, Lord Bashir. There may not be time for any of us to go mad before, and I would not waste one man for the risk anyway. When the Trollocs came out of the Blight in the Trolloc Wars, they marched with dreadlords, men and women who wielded the power for the Shadow. We will face that again at Tarmangaden. I don't know how many Aes Sedai will be at my side, but I won't turn away any man who channels, if he will march with me. Mazrim Taim is mine, Lord Bashir, not yours. I see. It was flatly said. You have taken Camelin. I hear that Tyr is yours, and Cairhien soon will be, if it is not already. Do you mean to conquer the world with your Aiel and your army of men channeling the One Power? If I must. Rand said it just as levelly.
Nice,
I'll welcome any ruler as an ally who welcomes me. But so far, all I've seen is maneuvering for power or outright hostility. Lord Bashir, there's anarchy in Taraban and Aradaman, and not far from it in Cairhien. Amadisia
oh,
is
that would
eyeing
be
Altara.
nice, but I'm in my
The
room.
Shonchan, you may have heard rumors of them in South
I'd have to go all the way to the front to do that.
The Shonchan on the other side of the world eyeing us all. Men fighting their own petty battles with Tarmangaden on the horizon. We need peace. Time before the Trollocs come, before the Dark One breaks free. Time to ready ourselves. If the only way I can find time and peace for the world is to impose it, I will. I don't want to, but I will. I have read the Karaethon cycle, Bashir said. Putting the goblets under his arm for a moment, he broke the wax seal on the jar and filled them with wine. More importantly, Queen Tenobia has read the prophecies too. I cannot speak for Kandor, or Arafel, or Shinar. I believe they will come to you. Not a child in the Borderlands, but knows the shadow waits in the blight to descend on us. But I cannot speak for them. And Nyla eyed the goblet he handed her suspiciously, but she climbed the stairs to hand it to Rand. In truth, Bashir continued, I cannot even speak for Saldeia. Tenobia rules. I am only her general. But I think once I send a fast rider to her with a message, the return will be that Saldeia marches with the Dragon Reborn. In the meanwhile, I offer you my services, and those of 9,000 Saldeian horse. Rand swirled the goblet, staring down into the dark red wine. Samael in Ilion, and other Forsaken the light alone knew where. Seanchan waiting across the Arth Ocean, and men here ready to leap for their own advantage and profit, whatever it cost the world. Peace is far off yet, he said softly. It will be blood and death for some time to come. It always is, Bashir replied quietly, and Rand did not know which statement he was speaking to. Perhaps both. Tucking his harp under his arm, Asmodean drifted away from Mat and Avienda. He enjoyed playing, but not for a pair who did not listen, much less appreciate. He was not sure what had happened that morning, and not sure he wanted to be sure. Too many Aiel had expressed surprise at seeing him, had claimed they had seen him dead. He did not want details. There was a long gash down the wall in front of him. He knew what made that sharp edge. That surface as slick as ice, smoother than any hand could have polished it in 100 years. Idly, but with a shiver too, he wondered whether being reborn in this fashion made him a new man. He did not think so. Immortality was gone. That was a gift of the Great Lord. He used that name in his head, whatever Althor demanded on his tongue. That was proof enough that he was himself. Immortality gone, he knew it must be imagination, yet sometimes he thought he could feel time dragging at him, pulling him toward a grave he had never thought to meet. And drawing the little of Sayadine he could was like drinking sewage. He was hardly sorry Lanfear was dead. Ravin either, but Lanfear especially for what she had done to him. He would laugh when each of the others died too, and most for the last. It was not that he had been reborn as a new man at all, but he would cling to that tuft of grass on the cliff's brink as long as he could. The roots would give way eventually. The long fall would come. But until then, he was still alive. He pulled open a small door, intending to find his way to the pantry. There should be some decent wine. One step, and he stopped, the blood draining from his face. You! No! The words still hung in the air when death took him.
Morgase blotted sweat from her face, then tucked the handkerchief back up her sleeve and readjusted her somewhat ragged straw hat. At least she had managed to acquire a decent riding dress, though even fine gray wool was still uncomfortable in this heat. Actually, Talonvor had acquired it. Letting her horse walk, she eyed the tall young man riding up ahead through the trees. Bessel Gale's roundness emphasized how tall and fit Talonvor was. He had handed the dress to her, saying it suited her better than the itchy thing she had fled the palace in, looking down at her, never blinking, never speaking a word of respect. Of course, she herself had decided it was not safe for anyone to know who she was, especially after discovering Gareth Bryn gone from Core Springs. Why did the man have to be off chasing barn burners when she needed him? No matter, she would do as well without him. But there was something disturbing in Talonvor's eyes when he called her simply Morghese. Sighing, she glanced back over her shoulder. Hulking Lamgwin rode watching the forest, Brianna at her side watching him as much as anything else. Her army had not grown a whit
Hey,
since
D-Man, how
Camelin.
you doing?
Too many had heard of nobles exiled for no cause and unjust laws in the capital to
Hope
do
you're
more
doing
than
good.
scoff at the most casual mention of stirring a hand in support of their rightful ruler. She doubted that even knowing who spoke them would have made a difference. So here she rode through Altara, keeping to forest as much as possible, because there seemed to be parties of armed men everywhere. Rode through the forest with a scar-faced street tough, a besotted refugee Kyrianan noblewoman, a stout innkeeper who could hardly keep from kneeling whenever she glanced at him, and a young soldier who sometimes looked at her as though she had on one of those dresses she had worn for Gabriel. And Lini, of course. There was no forgetting Lini. As if thinking of her had been a summons, the old nurse heeled
How's
her horse
your
closer.
night going, D-Man?
Better to keep your eyes ahead,
How's work going?
she said quietly. A young lion charges quickest, and when you least expect it. You think Talonvor is dangerous? Morghese said sharply, and Lini gave her a sidelong, considering look. Only the way any man would be dangerous. A fine figure of a man, don't you think? More than tall enough. Strong, I should think. There's no point letting honey age too long before you eat it. Lini, Morghese said warningly. The old woman had been going on this way too often of late. Talonvor was a handsome man. His hands did look strong, and he had a well-turned calf. But he was young, and she was his queen. The last thing she needed was to start looking at him as a man instead of her subject and soldier. She was about to tell Lini that, and that the woman had lost her wits if she thought she was going to take up with any man 10 years her junior. He had to be
Hey,
back.
Dream Warrior, how
But
you doing?
Talonvor and Gil were turning back. You hold your tongue, Lini. If you put foolish ideas into that young man's head, I will leave you
How you
somewhere.
been doing, D-Man?
Lini's snort would
excuse
have
me.
earned the highest
Dream
noble
Warrior.
in Andor time in a cell
Getting
to
names mixed up
meditate.
over here.
If she still had her throne, it would. Are you sure
Hope you've
you
been
want to
doing
do
well.
this, girl? It's too late to change your mind after you've jumped off the cliff. I will find my allies where I can find them, Morghese told her stiffly. Talonvor reined up, sitting tall in his saddle. Sweat rolled down his face, but he seemed to ignore the heat. Master Gil tugged at the neck of his disc-covered jerkin as though he wished he could have it off. The wood gives way to farms just ahead, Talonvor said, but it isn't likely anyone will recognize you here. Morghese met his gaze levelly. Day by day, it was becoming increasingly hard to look away when he was looking at her. Another 10 miles should take us to Cormaid. If that fellow in Sahar was not lying, there will be a ferry, and we can be on the Amadisia side before dark. Are you certain you want to do this, Morghese? The way he said her name... No. She was letting Lini's ridiculous fancies take hold of her. It was the accursed heat. I have made up my mind, young Talonvor, she said coolly, and I do not expect you to question me when I have done so. She heeled her mount hard, letting the horses leap forward, break their gazes apart, letting it shove past him. He could catch up to her. She would find her allies where she found them. She would have her throne back. And woe to Gabriel, or any man, who thought he could sit on it in her place.
And the glory of the light did shine upon him, and the peace of the light did he give men, binding nations to him, making one of many. Yet the shards of hearts did give wounds, and what was once did come again, in fire and in storm, splitting all in twain.
The Sidhe were believed to...
This is Audible.
For Rand to make out. Lan strode along as if he did not even notice. Rand kept pace behind their escorts and wished he could hear. And then they reached the Amerlin Seat's chambers, with 3 Aes Sedai in the hall outside the door. The tall Aes Sedai, Lyanna, held her gold-flamed staff. Rand did not know the other 2, one of the White Ajah, and one yellow by their fringe. He remembered their faces, though, staring at him as he had run through these same halls. Smooth Aes Sedai faces with knowing eyes. They studied him with arched eyebrows and pursed lips. The women who had brought Lan and Rand curtsied, handing them over to the Aes Sedai. Lyanna looked Rand over with a slight smile. Despite the smile, her voice had a snap to it. "What have you brought the Amerlin Seat today, Lan Gaidin? A young lion? Better you don't let any Greens see this one, or one of them will bond him before he can take a breath. Greens like to bond them young." Rand wondered if it was really possible to sweat inside your skin. He felt as if he was. He wanted to look at Lan, but he remembered this part of the warder's instructions. "I am Rand al'Thor, son of Tam al'Thor, of the 2 rivers, which once was Manetheren. As I have been summoned by the Amerlin Seat, Lyanna Sedai, so do I come. I stand ready." He was surprised that his voice did not shake once. Lyanna blinked. Her smile faded to a thoughtful look. "This is supposed to be a shepherd, Lan Gaidin." He was not so sure of himself this
Good little
morning.
hit of wax, too.
"He is a man, Lyanna Sedai," Lan said firmly. "No more and no less. We are what we are." The Aes Sedai shook her head. "The world grows stranger every day. I suppose the blacksmith will wear a crown and speak in high chant. Wait here." She vanished inside to announce them. She was only gone a few moments, but Rand was uncomfortably aware of the eyes of the remaining Aes Sedai. He tried to return their gaze levelly, the way Lan had told him to. They put their heads together, whispering. What are they saying? What do they know? Light, are they going to gentle me? Was that what Lan meant about facing whatever comes? Lyanna returned, motioning Rand to go in. When Lan started to follow, she thrust her staff across his chest, stopping him. "Not you, Lan Gaidin. Moiraine Sedai has a task for you. Your lion cub will be safe enough by himself." The door swung shut behind Rand, but not before he heard Lan's voice, fierce and strong, but low for his ear alone. "Taishar, Manetheren." Moiraine sat to one side of the room, and one of the brown Aes Sedai he had seen in the dungeon sat to the other. But it was the woman in the tall chair behind the wide table who held his eye. The curtains have been partially drawn over the arrow slits, but the gaps let in enough light behind her to make her face hard to see clearly. He still recognized her, though. The Amerlin seat. Quickly, he dropped to one knee, left hand on sword hilt, right fist pressed to the patterned rug, and bowed his head. As you have summoned me, Mother, so have I come. I stand ready. He lifted his head in time to see her eyebrows rise. Do you now, boy? She sounded almost amused, and something else he could not make out. She certainly did not look amused. Stand up, boy, and let me have a look at you. He straightened and tried to keep his face relaxed. It was an effort not to clench his hands. 3 Aes Sedai. How many does it take to gentle a man? They sent a dozen or more after Loghain. Would Moraine do that to me? He met the Amerlin seat's look, eye to eye. She did not blink. Sit, boy, she said finally, gesturing to a ladder-backed chair that had been pulled around squarely in front of the table. This will not be short, I fear. Thank you, Mother. He bowed his head, then, as Lan had told him, glanced at the chair and touched his sword. By your leave, Mother, I will stand. The watch is not done. The Amerlin seat made an exasperated sound and looked at Moraine. Have you let Lan at him, daughter? This will be difficult enough without him picking up waterways. Lan has been teaching all the boys, Mother, Moraine replied calmly. He has spent a little more time with this one than the others because he carries a sword. The brown Aes Sedai shifted on her chair. The Gaidin are stiff-necked and proud, Mother, but
Hey,
useful.
Fried, how you doing?
I would not be without Tomas, as
All right.
you would not lose Ulrich.
Oh, smoking a
I
bowl.
have even heard a few Reds say they sometimes wish for a warder. And the Greens, of course. The 3 Aes Sedai were all ignoring him now. This sword, the Amerlin seat said, it appears to be a heron mark blade. How did he come by that, Moraine? Tamal Thor left the 2 Rivers as a boy, Mother. He joined the army of Ilion and served in the White Cloak War and the last
Hell
2
yeah.
wars with Tyr.
I'm smoking on.
In time, he rose to be a
I
blade
don't
master
remember,
and the
but
2nd captain of the
I
Companions.
got some,
After the Aiel War, Tamal Thor returned to the 2 Rivers with a wife from
Calm's
Kingland
crown jewel.
and an infant boy.
It
It would have saved
light
much had I
rosin
known
on it.
this earlier, but I know it now.
So that's top on
Rand
top
stared
of the
at
bowl.
Moraine. He knew Tam had left the 2 Rivers and come back with an Outlander wife and the sword. But the rest? Where did you learn all that? Not in Emond's Field. Unless Nynaeve told you more than she's ever told me. An infant boy? She doesn't say his son, but I am.
But it's,
Against Tyr. The Amerlin seat frowned slightly. Well, there was blame enough on both sides in those wars. Fool men who would rather fight than talk. Can you tell if the blade is authentic, Varen? There are tests, Mother. Then take it and test it, daughter. The 3 women were not even looking at him. Rand stepped back, gripping the hilt hard. My father gave this sword to me, he said angrily. Nobody is taking it from me. It was only then that he realized Varen had not moved from her chair. He looked at them in confusion,
Nice,
trying to recover
nice.
his equilibrium. So, the Amerlin seat said, you have some fire in you besides whatever Lan put in. Good. You will need it. I am what I am, Mother, he managed smoothly enough. I stand ready for what comes. The Amerlin seat grimaced. Lan has been at you. Listen to me, boy. In a few hours, Ingtar will leave to find the stolen horn. Your friend Matt will go with him. I expect that your other friend, Perrin, will go also. Do you wish to accompany them? Matt and Perrin are going? Why? Belatedly, he remembered to add a respectful, Mother. You know of the dagger your friend carried? A twist of her mouth showed what she thought
I
of
go
the
for
dagger.
taste.
That was taken too. Unless it is
It's just that
found,
if
the
something
link
tastes
between
good,
him
I
and the
tend to buy
blade cannot be broken
a good
completely,
amount of
and
it.
he will die. You can ride with them if you want, or you can stay here. No doubt Lord Oglomar will let you remain as a guest as long as you wish. I will be leaving today as well.
Moraine Sedai will accompany me, and so will Egwene and Nynaeve. So you will stay alone if you stay. The choice is yours. Rand stared at her. She's saying I can go as I want.
Yeah, it's already that time of year
Is that
for
what she
him,
brought
too.
me here for? Mat is dying. He glanced at Moraine, sitting impassively with her hands folded in her lap. She looked as if nothing in the world could concern her less than where he went. Which way are you trying to push me, Aes Sedai? Burn me, but I'll go another. But if Mat's dying, I can't abandon him.
Excuse me.
Light, how are we going to find that dagger? You do not have to make the choice now, the Amyrlin said. She did not seem to care either. But you will have to choose before Ingtar leaves. I will ride with Ingtar, Mother. The Amyrlin seat nodded absently. Now that that is dealt with, we can move on to important matters. I know you can channel, boy. What do you know? Rand's mouth fell open. Caught up in worrying about plans, her casual words hit him like a swinging barn door. All of Lan's advice and instructions went spinning. He stared at her, licking his lips. It was one thing to think she knew, entirely another to find out she really did. The sweat finally seeped out on his forehead. She leaned forward in her seat, waiting for his answer, but he had the feeling she wanted to lean back. He remembered what Lan had said. If she's afraid of you, he wanted to laugh. If she was afraid of him. No, I can't. I mean, I didn't do it on purpose. It just happened. I don't want to channel the power. I won't ever do it again. I swear it. You don't want to, the Amyrlin seat said. Well, that's wise of you.
Hell
And
yeah.
foolish, too.
It's always good when
Some
you
can be
find
taught to channel.
a strain
cannot.
that's
A few, though, have the
acclimated to
seed
your
in them at
climate.
birth.
That does good and
Sooner or
that
later,
thrives
they
in that
wield the one
climate.
power, whether they want
Those
to
are
or
the
not,
best
as
ones.
surely as roe makes fish. You will continue to channel, boy.
They just
You can't
try to
help
find
it.
the right one sometimes.
And you had better learn to channel. Learn to control it. Or you will not live long enough to go mad. The one power kills those who cannot control its flow. How am I supposed to learn? He demanded. Moraine and Varen just sat there, unruffled, watching him. Like spiders. How? Moraine claims she can't teach me anything, and I don't know how to learn or what. I don't want to anyway. I want to stop. Can't you understand that? To stop! I told you the truth, Rand, Moraine said. She sounded as if they were having a pleasant conversation. Those who could teach you, the male Aes Sedai, are 3,000 years dead. No Aes Sedai living can teach you to touch Saidin any more than you could learn to touch Saidar. A bird cannot teach a fish to fly, nor a fish teach a bird to swim. I have always thought that was a bad saying, Varen said suddenly. There are birds that dive and swim, and in the Sea of Storms are fish that fly, with long fins that stretch out as wide as your outstretched arms, and beaks like swords that can pierce. Her words trailed off, and she became flustered. Moraine and the Amyrlin seat were staring at her without expression. Rand took the interruption to try to regain some control of himself. As Tam had taught him long ago, he formed a single flame in his mind and put his fears into it, seeking emptiness, the stillness of the void. The flame seemed to grow until it enveloped everything, until it was too large to contain or imagine any longer. With that, it was gone.
I don't know,
being
we
in its
haven't been
place
fishing
sense
in a
of
while.
peace. At its edges, emotions still flickered, fear and anger like black blotches, but the void held. Thought skimmed across its surface like pebbles across ice. The Aes Sedai's attention was only off him for a moment, but when they turned back, his face was calm. Why are you talking to me like this, Mother? He asked. You should be gentling me. The Amyrlin seat frowned and turned to Moraine. Did Lan teach him this? No, Mother. He had that from Tam al'Thor. Why? Rand demanded again. The Amyrlin seat looked him straight in the eye and said, Because you are the dragon reborn. The void rocked. The world rocked. Everything seemed to spin around him. He concentrated on nothing, and the emptiness returned. The world steadied. No, Mother. I can channel the light, help me, but I am not Rowland Darksbane, nor Gwer Amalasan, nor Urian Stonebow. You can gentle me or kill me, or let me go. But I will not be a tame false dragon on a Tarvalin leash. He heard Varen gasp, and the Amerlin's eyes widened,
Hell yeah.
gaze as hard as blue rock.
Make sure it's a good one.
It did not affect him. It slid off the void within.
Especially, make sure it's good,
Where
sturdy
did you hear
glass.
those names? The Amerlin demanded. Who told you Tarvalin pulls the lines on any false dragon? A friend, Mother, he said. A gleeman. His name was Tom Merlin. He's dead now. Moraine made a sound and he glanced at her. She claimed Tom was not dead, but she had never offered any proof, and he could not see how any man could survive grappling hand-to-hand with a Fade. The thought was extraneous, and it faded away. There was only the void and the oneness now. You are not a false dragon, the Amerlin said firmly. You are the true dragon reborn. I'm a shepherd from the Two Rivers, Mother. Daughter, tell him the story. A true story, boy. Listen well. Moraine began speaking. Rand kept his eyes on the Amerlin's face, but he heard. Nearly 20 years ago, the Aiel crossed the spine of the world, the Dragon Wall, the only time they have ever done so. They ravaged through Cairhien, destroyed every army sent against them, burned the city of Cairhien itself, and fought all the way to Tarvalin. It was winter and snowing, but cold or heat mean little to an Aiel. The final battle, the last that counted, was fought outside the Shining Walls in the shadow of Dragonmount. In 3 days and nights of fighting, the Aiel were turned back. Or rather, they turned back, for they had done what they came to do, which was to kill King Laman of Cairhien for his sin against the tree. It is then that my story begins, and yours. They came over the Dragon Wall like a flood, all the way to the Shining Walls. Rand waited for the memories to fade, but it was Tam's voice he heard, Tam sick and raving, pulling up secrets from his past. The voice clung outside the void, clamoring to get in. I was one of the accepted then, Moraine said, as was our mother, the Amerlin Seat. We were soon to be raised to sisterhood, and that night we stood attendance on the then Amerlin. Her keeper of the chronicles, Gitara Moroso, was there.
Hey, D-Man,
Every other
how
full
you
sister
doing?
in Tarvalin was out healing
Happy
as many
birthday,
wounded
bro.
as she could find, even the Reds. It was dawn.
Hope you had a
The
good
fire on the
birthday.
hearth could not keep the cold out. The snow had finally stopped, and in the Amerlin's chambers in the White Tower, we could smell the smoke of outlying villages burned in the fighting. Battles are always hot, even in the snow. Had to get away from
Got
the
me
sting
a
of death. Tam's
new
delirious
pair.
voice clawed at the empty calm inside
It
him.
has 2
The
flavors.
void
It's a
trembled and
2-grammer.
shrank, steadied, then wavered again. The Amerlin's eyes
Controlled by
bored him.
that.
He felt sweat on his
You
face
put it
again.
on 1 to hit it.
It was all a fever dream,
And
he
then
said. He was sick. He raised
Flip
his
the
voice.
switch
My name is
all the
Randolph
way
Thor.
over and hit
I'm
the
a
other
shepherd.
one.
My father is Tamil Thor, and my mother was...
And then we put
Moraine
it,
had paused
the
for him.
switch in the
Now
middle.
her
You
unchanging
hit
voice
both the
cut him off,
flavors, which
soft
is
and relentless.
makes the 3rd
The
flavor.
Koreathon Cycle, the prophecies of the dragon, says that the dragon will be reborn on the slopes of Dragonmount, where he died during the breaking of the world. Gitara Sadai had the foretelling sometimes. She was old, her hair as white as the snow outside. But when she had the foretelling, it was strong. The morning light through the windows was strengthening as I handed her a cup of tea. The Amerlin Seat asked me what news there was from the field of battle. And Gitara Sadai started up
Oh, you
out of her
had to
chair,
work? That sucks.
her arms and legs rigid, trembling. Her face as if she looked into the pit of doom at Sheol Ghul, and she cried out, He is born again. I feel it. The dragon takes his first breath on the slope of Dragonmount. He is coming. He is coming. Light help us. Light help the world. He lies in the snow and cries like the thunder. He burns like the sun. And she fell forward into my arms, dead. Slope of the mountain. Heard a baby cry. gave birth there alone before she died. Child blue with the cold. Rand tried to force Tam's voice away. The void grew smaller.
I don't know.
A fever dream.
You can still get
gasped.
them here at the
I
dispensaries.
couldn't leave a child. I was born in the Two Rivers. Always knew you wanted children, Kari. He pulled his eyes away from the Amelin's gaze. He tried to force the void to hold. He knew that was not the
Oh,
way,
no.
but it was collapsing in him. Yes, lad.
We're around.
I am Rand. His legs trembled. And so knew the dragon was reborn, Moraine went on. The Amelin swore us to secrecy, we two. For she knew not all the sisters would see the rebirth as it must be seen. She set us to searching. There were many fatherless children after that battle. Too many. But we found a story that one man had found an infant on the mountain. That was all. A man and an infant boy. So we searched on. For years we searched, finding other clues, poring over the prophecies. He will be of the ancient blood and raised by the old blood. That was one. There were others. But there are many places where the old blood, descended from the age of legends, remains strong. Then in the Two Rivers, where the old blood of Manetheren seethes still like a river in flood, in Emond's Field, I found 3 boys whose name days were within weeks of the battle at Dragonmount. And one of them can channel. Do you think Trollocs came after you just because you are ta'veren? You are the dragon reborn. Rand's knees gave way. He dropped to a squat,
Right
hands
there.
slapping the rug to catch himself from falling on his face. The void was gone, the stillness shattered. He raised his head, and they were looking at him, the 3 Aes Sedai. Their faces were serene, smooth as unruffled ponds, but their eyes did not blink. My father is Tamil Thor, and I was born... They stared at him, unmoving. They're lying. I am not what they say. Some way, somehow, they're lying, trying to use me. I will not be used by you. An anchor is not demeaned by being used to hold a boat, the Amelin said. You were made for a purpose, Randall Thor. When the winds of Tarman Gaden scour the earth, he will face the shadow and bring forth light again in the world. The prophecies must be fulfilled, or the Dark One will break free and remake the world in his image. The last battle is coming, and you were born to unite mankind and lead them against the Dark One. Balsamon is dead, Rand said hoarsely, and the Amelin snorted like a stable hand. If you believe that, you are as much a fool as the Domani. Many there believe he is dead, or say they do. But I notice they still won't risk naming him. The Dark One lives, and he is breaking free. You will face the Dark One. It is your destiny. It is your destiny. He had heard that before, in a dream, that had maybe not been entirely a dream. He wondered what the Amelin would say if she knew Balsamon had spoken to him in dreams. That's done with. Balsamon is dead. I saw him die. Suddenly it came to him that he was crouching like a toad, huddling under their eyes. He tried to form the void again, but voices whirled through his
Hell
head,
yeah,
sweeping
D-Man.
away every effort. It is your destiny. Babe lying in the snow. You are the dragon reborn. Balsamon is dead. Rand is a good name, Kari. I will not be used. Drawing on his own native stubbornness, he forced himself back upright. Face it on your feet. You can keep your pride, at least. The 3 Aes Sedai watched with no expression. What? With an effort, he steadied his voice. What are you going to do to me? Nothing, the Amelin said, and he blinked. It was not the answer he had expected, the one he had feared. You say you want to accompany your friend with Ingtar, and you may. I have not marked you out in any way. Some of the sisters may know you are ta'veren, but no more. Only we 3 know who you truly are. Your friend Perrin will be brought to me as you were, and I will visit your other friend in the infirmary. You may go as you will, without fear that we will set the Red Sisters on you. Who you truly are. Anger flared up in him, hot and corrosive. He forced it to stay inside, hidden. Why? The prophecies must be fulfilled. We let you walk free, knowing what you are, because otherwise the world we know will die, and the Dark One will cover the earth with fire and death. Mark me, not all Aes Sedai will the same. There are some here in Pandora who would strike you down if they knew the truth of what you are, and feel no more remorse than for getting the dish. Then there are men who would no doubt laugh with you, who would do the same if they knew. Have a care, Randall Thor, Dragon Reborn. He looked at each of them in turn.
That one was a rough one there.
Prophecies are no part of me. They returned
No,
his
the
gaze so
last of,
calmly it was hard to believe they
ball
were trying to
and,
convince him he was the most hated,
big old
the
head
most
of wax
feared
at the
man
same
in the
time.
history of the world. He had gone right through fear and come out the other side in some place cold. Anger was all that kept him warm. They could gentle him or burn him to a crisp where he stood, and he no longer cared. Lion's instructions came back to him. Left hand on the hilt, he twisted the sword behind him, catching the scabbard in his right, then bowed, arms straight. By your leave, Mother. May I depart this place? I give you leave to go. Straightening, he stood there a minute longer. I will not be used, he told them. There was a long silence as he turned and left.
The silence stretched on in the room after Rand left until it was broken by a long breath from the Amyrlin. I cannot make myself like what we just did, she said. It was necessary, but did it hurt my daughters? Warren shook her head, just the slightest movement. I do not know, but it was necessary, and is. Necessary, Varen agreed. She touched her forehead, then peered at the dampness on her fingers. He is strong, and as stubborn as you said, Moiraine. Much stronger than I expected. We may have to gentle him after all before... Her eyes widened. But we cannot, can we? The prophecies. The light forgive us for what we are loosing on the world. The prophecies, Moiraine said, nodding. Afterwards, we will do as we must, as we do now. As we must, the Amyrlin said. Yes, but when he learns to channel, the light help us all. The silence returned. There was a storm coming. Nynaeve felt it. A big storm, worse than she had ever seen. She could listen to the wind and hear what the weather would be. All wisdoms claimed to be able to do that, though many could not. Nynaeve had felt more comfortable with the ability before learning it was a manifestation of the power. Any woman who could listen to the wind could channel, though most were probably as she had been, unaware of what she was doing, getting it only in fits and starts. This time, though, something was wrong. Outside, the morning sun was a golden ball in a clear blue sky, and birds sang in the gardens, but that was not it. There would have been nothing to listening to the wind if she could not foretell the weather before the signs were visible. There was something wrong with the feeling this time, something not quite the way it usually was. The storm felt distant, too far off for her to feel at all. Yet it felt as if the sky above should have been pouring down rain and snow and hail all at the same time, with winds howling to shake the stones of the keep. And she could feel the good weather, too, lasting for days yet, but that was muted under the other. A bluefinch perched in an arrow slit, like a mockery of her weather sense, peering into the hallway. When it saw her, it vanished in a flash of blue and white feathers. She stared at the spot where the bird had been. There is a storm, and there isn't. It means something, but what? Far down the hall, full of women and small children, she saw Rand striding away, his escort of women half running to keep up. Nynaeve nodded firmly. If there was a storm that was not a storm, he would be the center of it. Gathering her skirts, she hurried after him. Women with whom she had grown friendly since coming to Fal Dara tried to speak to her. They knew Rand had come with her and that they were both from the Two Rivers, and they wanted to know why the Amyrlin had summoned him. The Amyrlin's seat. Ice in the pit of her belly, she broke into a run. But before she left the women's apartments, she had lost him around too many corners and beyond too many people. Which way did he go? She asked Nisura. There was no need to say who. She heard Anne's name in the conversation of the other women clustered around the arched doors. I don't know, Nynaeve. He came out as fast as if he had Heartsbane himself at his heels. As well he might, coming here with a sword at his belt. The Dark One should be the least of his worries after that. What is the world coming to? And him presented to the Amyrlin in her chambers, no less. Tell me, Nynaeve, is he really a prince in your land? The other women stopped talking and leaned closer to listen.
Oh, that raccoon's looking
Nynaeve
for
was
some
not
food
sure
to
what
munch
she
on.
answered. Something that made them let her go on. She hurried away from the women's apartments, head
Yeah, I
swiveling
got
at every crossing corridor to
a
look for him,
GoPro.
fists
I
clenched.
think it's a GoPro
Light,
9
what
where I
have
can
they
actually
done to
live
him?
stream off of
I
it.
should have gotten him away from Moiraine somehow, the light blind her. I'm his wisdom. Are you? A small voice taunted. You've abandoned Emmons Field to fend for itself. Can you still call yourself their wisdom?
That is gonna
I
have
did
a
not
light.
abandon
It's
them, she told herself
it's a
fiercely.
green one.
I brought Mavra Malin up from Devon Ride to look after matters
It
till
would
I
be
get
darker
back.
too if I
She
didn't
can
have
deal
a
well
light
enough with the
behind
mayor
it.
and the village
'Cause
council,
watch.
and she gets on well with the women's circle. Mavra will have to get back to her own village. No village can do without its wisdom for long. Nynaeve cringed inside. She had
Now,
been gone months
with the
from
light.
Emmons Field. I am the wisdom of Emmons Field,
Little
she
camping
said
light,
aloud.
but it works.
A liveried servant carrying a bolt of cloth blinked at her, then bowed low before scurrying off.
I
By
like
his
it
face, he
just
was eager to
because
be anywhere else.
I can live stream straight
Blushing,
from it.
Nynaeve looked
I don't
around to
have
see
to
if anyone had noticed. There were
get my
only a few
laptop
men in the
out,
hall engrossed in their
Get my
own
webcam set
conversations,
up,
and some women
or
in black and
use
gold
my
going about their
tablet
business, giving
for
her
my
a bow
streaming.
or curtsy as she passed.
and that
She
I
had
can
had
post
that
at much
argument with
better
herself
spaces,
100
so
times before,
I can
but
actually
this
live
was the first
stream
time it had come to talking to
my
herself out
diamond art
loud.
when I do
She
it.
muttered under her breath, then pressed her lips firmly together when she realized what she was doing.
But I got a good deal at
She was finally beginning to realize her
errands when I
search
was
was
going to make
futile
my
when she came
payment
on land,
for
his
actually
back
for my
to
laptop.
her, looking down on the
They
outer
had the
courtyard through an
GoPro
arrow
on
slit.
sale
The noise from the courtyard
on
was
a
all
price
horses
I
and
couldn't
men,
pass
neighing
up.
and
I had
shouting.
the extra money.
So intent was Lan that he did not
and
for once seem
I
to
got
hear
it.
her. She hated
It's
the
what,
fact that she could never sneak up on
Most
him,
hated
however
grower
softly she stepped.
uses when we do
She'd been
our,
accounted good at woodscraft
our
back in
smoke
Emmons
streams.
Field, though it was not
It's
a
on the
skill in
GoPro
which many
also,
women took any
because he's
interest.
got the same one
She stopped in
or
her
the same
tracks, pressing
model.
her hands to her stomach to quiet a flutter.
And that's one
I ought
reason
to
I
dose
wanted to
myself
get it
with
even
rannel
too
and
is
sheep's
because
tongue root, she thought sourly.
how well
It was
does
the
when
mixture
we
she
do our
gave anyone who
streams.
moped about and claimed they were sick or behaved like a goose. Rannel and sheep's tongue root would perk you up a little and did no harm, but mainly it tasted horrible, and the taste
I got
lasted
it
all day.
for,
It was a perfect
I
cure
think
for acting
after
the fool.
tax, I paid,
Safe from his
like
eyes, she
$185,
studied the length of
and it
him,
was at,
leaning against the
Aaron's,
stone and fingering
where you
his
go,
chin as he
rent
studied
to
what
own
was going
stuff
on
at.
below. He's too tall for one
because
thing,
I make my
and old
payment
enough
for
to be my
my,
father for another. A man with a
for
face
my
like that would have
laptop
to be
and for
cruel.
my
No,
Nintendo
he's
Switch.
not that. Never that. And he was a
I
king.
make my payments
His land
there.
was destroyed
and
while he was a child, and he would not
They
claim a
had,
crown, but he was a king for that. What would a king
too
want with a
many in
village woman?
stock.
He's
They
a
weren't
warder,
moving them
too,
quick enough.
bonded to Moiraine. She has his
So,
loyalty to death
I
and
got
ties
at a-
closer
I
than
got
any
at a
lover, and she
pretty,
has him.
Pretty good
She has
discount.
everything I want. The light burn her.
Like I
He
said, I
turned
paid,
from the arrow slit, and she
I think it
whirled
was
to
like
go.
180, 185 and some change.
His voice caught and held her like a noose. I wanted to speak to you alone. You always seem to be in the women's apartments.
Give me 1 second, everyone. I'll be right back.
It took an effort to face him, but she was sure her features were calm when she looked up at him. I'm looking for Rand. She was not about to admit to avoiding him. We said all we need to say long ago, you and I. I shamed myself, which I will not do again, and you told me to go away. I never said... He took a deep breath. I told you I had nothing to offer for bride price but widow's clothes. Not a gift any man could give a woman. Not a man who can call himself a man. I understand, she said coolly. In any case, a king does not give gifts to village women, and this village woman would not take them. Have you seen Rand? I need to talk to him. He was to see the Amyrlin. Do you know what she wanted with him? His eyes blazed like blue ice in the sun. She stiffened her legs to keep from stepping back, and met him glare for glare. The Dark One take Rand al'Thor and the Amyrlin seat both, he grated, pressing something into her hand. I will make you a gift, and you will take it if I have to chain it around your neck. She pulled her eyes away from his. He had a stare like a blue-eyed hawk when he was angry. In her hand was a signet ring, heavy gold and worn with age, almost large enough for both her thumbs to fit through. On it a crane flew above a lance and crown, all carefully wrought in detail. Her breath caught. The ring of Malkieri kings. Forgetting to glare, she lifted her face. I cannot take this, Lan. He shrugged in an offhand way. It is nothing. Old and useless now. But there are those who would know it when they saw it. Show that and you will have guest right, and help if you need it, from any lord in the borderlands. Show it to a warder and he will give aid, or carry a message to me. Send it to me, or a message marked with it, and I will come to you without delay and without fail. This I swear. Her vision blurred at the edges. If I cry now, I will kill myself. I can't... I do not want a gift from you, Al-Lan Mandragoran. Here,
Yeah, so
take it.
at that price
He
I couldn't
fended off
pass
her
it up
attempts
in.
to give the ring back to
The
him.
picture quality
His
is
hand
good.
enveloped hers, gentle but
The
firm as a
battery life,
shackle.
on the other hand, is another
Then
matter.
take it for my sake as a favor to me. Or throw it
The
away
only
if
reason
it displeases you.
It
I've no
hasn't
better
gotten
use
dead
for it.
yet is
He
'cause I'm
brushed her
hooked up
cheek
to a
with a
battery
finger
pack.
and she gave a start. I must go now, Nynaeve Mashiara. Beyond.
Oh. Give me 1 second, everyone. My speaker just went dead. Okay. Time to get the backup speaker. There we go. Got stains all over my shirt. I just noticed that in the picture on that video. Here we go.
Perhaps we will have time to talk on the journey to Tar Valon. He turned and was gone, striding down the hall. Nynaeve touched her cheek. She could still feel where he had touched her. Mashiara. Beloved of heart and soul, it meant, but a love lost, too. Lost beyond regaining. Fool woman. Stop acting like a girl with her hair still not braided. It's no use letting him make you feel... Clutching the ring tightly, she turned around and jumped when she found herself face to face with Moiraine. How long have you been there? She demanded. Not long enough to hear anything I should not have, the Aes Sedai replied smoothly. We will be leaving soon. I heard that. You must see to your packing. Leaving? It had not penetrated when Lan said it. I will have to say goodbye to the boys, she muttered, then gave Moiraine a sharp look. What have you done to Rand? He was taken to the Amyrlin. Why? Did you tell her about... She could not say it. He was from her own village, and she was just enough older than he to have looked after him a time or two when he was little, but she could not even think about what he had become without her stomach twisting. The Amyrlin will be seeing all three, Nynaeve. Taviran are not so common that she would miss the chance to see three together in one place. Perhaps she will give them a few words of encouragement, since they are riding with Ingtar to hunt those who stole the horn.
They will be leaving about the time we do, so you had better hurry with any farewells." Nynaeve dashed to the nearest arrow slit and peered down at the outer courtyard. Horses were everywhere, pack animals and saddle horses, and men hurrying about them, calling to each other. The only clear space was where the Amerlin's palanquin stood, its paired horses waiting patiently without any attendants. Some of the warders were out there looking over their mounts, and on the other side of the courtyard, Ingtar stood with a knot of Shinarans around him in armor. Sometimes a warder or one of Ingtar's men crossed the paving stones to exchange a word. "I should have gotten the boys away from you," she said, still looking out. "Egwene, too, if I could do it without killing her. Light! Why did she have to be born with this cursed ability? I should have taken them back home." "They are more than old enough to be off apron strings," Moiraine said dryly. "And you know very well why you could never do that. For one of them, at least. Besides, it would mean leaving Egwene to go to Tar Valon alone. Or have you decided to forego Tar Valon yourself? If your own use of the power is not schooled, you will never be able to use it against me." Nynaeve spun to face the Aes Sedai, her jaw dropping. She could not help it. "I don't know what you are talking about." "Did you think I did not know, child? Well, as you wish it. I take it that you are coming to Tar Valon? Yes, I thought so." Nynaeve wanted to hit her, to knock away the brief smile that flashed across the Aes Sedai's face. Aes Sedai had not been able to wield power openly since the breaking, much less the One Power, but they plotted and manipulated, pulled strings like puppet masters, used thrones and nations like stones on a stone's board. She wants to use me, too, somehow. If a king or a queen, why not a wisdom? Just the way she's using Rand. I'm no child, Aes Sedai. What are you doing with Rand now? Have you not used him enough? I don't know why you have not had him gentled. Now the Amerlin's here with all those other Aes Sedai, but you must have a reason. It must be some plot you're hatching. If the Amerlin knew what you were up to, I wager she'd... Moiraine cut her off. What possible interest could the Amerlin have in a shepherd? Of course, if he were brought to her attention in the wrong way, he might be gentled or even killed. He is what he is, after all. And there is considerable anger about last night. Everyone is looking for whom to blame. The Aes Sedai fell silent and let the silence stretch. Nynaeve stared at her, grinding her teeth. "Yes," Moiraine said finally. "Much better to let a sleeping lion sleep. Best you see to your packing now." She moved off in the direction Lan had gone, seeming to glide across the floor. Grimacing, Nynaeve swung her fist back against the wall. The ring dug at her palm. She opened her hand to look at it. The ring seemed to heat her anger, focus her hate. "I will learn. You think because you know you can escape me, but I will learn better than you think. And I will pull you down for what you've done. For what you've done to Mat and to Perrin. For Rand, the light help him and the Creator shelter him. Especially for Rand." Her hand closed around the heavy circlet of gold. "And for me." Egwene watched the liveried maid folding her dresses into a leather-covered travel chest, still a little uncomfortable, even after nearly a month's practice, with someone else doing what she could very well have done herself. They were such beautiful dresses, all gifts from the Lady Amalisa, just like the gray silk riding dress she wore, though that was plain except for a few white morning star blossoms worked on the breast. Many of the dresses were much more elaborate. Any one of them would shine at Sunday or at Beltane. She sighed, remembering that she would be in Tar Valon for the next Sunday, not Emond's Field. From the little Moiraine had told her of novice training, almost nothing really. She expected she might not be home for Beltane in the spring or even the Sunday after that. Nynaeve put her head into the room. "Are you ready?" She came the rest of the way in. "We must be down in the courtyard soon." She wore a riding dress, too, in blue silk with red lover's knots on the bosom, another gift from Amalisa. "Nearly, Nynaeve. I'm almost sorry to be going. I don't suppose we'll have many chances in Tar Valon to wear the nice dresses Amalisa gave us." She gave an abrupt laugh. "Still, Wisdom, I won't miss being able to bathe without looking over my shoulder the whole time." "Much better to bathe alone," Nynaeve said briskly. Her face did not change, but after a moment her cheeks colored. Egwene smiled. She's thinking about Lan. It was still odd to think of Nynaeve, the Wisdom, mooning after a man. She did not think it would be wise to put it to Nynaeve in quite that way, but of late sometimes the Wisdom acted as strangely as any girl who had set her heart on a particular man, and one who doesn't have enough sense to be worthy of her at that. She loves him, and I can see he loves her, so why can't he have sense enough to speak up? "I don't think you should call me Wisdom any longer," Nynaeve said suddenly. Egwene blinked. It was not required exactly, and Nynaeve never insisted on it unless she was angry or being formal, but this, why ever not? "You are a woman now." Nynaeve glanced at her unbraided hair, and Egwene resisted the urge to hurriedly twist it into a semblance of a braid. Aes Sedai wore their hair any way they wanted, but wearing hers loose had become a symbol of starting on a new life. "You are a woman," Nynaeve repeated firmly. "We are two women, a long way from Emond's Field, and it will be longer still before we see home again. It will be better if you simply call me Nynaeve." "We will see home again, Nynaeve. We will." "Don't try to comfort the Wisdom girl," Nynaeve said gruffly, but she smiled. There was a knock at the door, but before Egwene could open it, Nisura came in, agitation all over her face. "Egwene, that young man of yours is trying to come into the women's apartments." She sounded scandalized. "And wearing a sword! Just because the Amyrlin let him enter that way, Lord Rand should know better. He is causing an uproar. Egwene, you must speak to him." "Lord Rand," Nynaeve snorted. "That young man is growing too big for his britches. When I get my hands on him, I'll lord him." Egwene put a hand on Nynaeve's arm. "Let me speak to him, Nynaeve. Alone." "Oh, very well. The best of men are not much better than housebroken." Nynaeve paused and added half to herself, "But then, the best of them are worth the trouble of housebreaking." Egwene shook her head as she followed Nisura into the hall. Even half a year before, Nynaeve would never have added the second part. But she'll never housebreak Lan. Her thoughts turned to Rand. Causing an uproar, was he? "Housebreak him," she muttered. "If he hasn't learned manners by this time, I'll skin him alive." "Sometimes that is what it takes," Nisura said, walking quickly. "Men are never more than half civilized until they're wedded." She gave Egwene a sidelong glance. "Do you intend to marry Lord Rand? I do not mean to pry, but you are going to the White Tower, and Aes Sedai seldom wed. None but some of the green Ajah that I've ever heard, and not many of them, and—" Egwene could supply the rest. She had heard the talk in the women's apartments about a suitable wife for Rand. At first it had caused stabs of jealousy and anger. He had been all but promised to her since they were children, but she was going to be an Aes Sedai, and he was what he was, a man who could channel. She could marry him and watch him go mad, watch him die. The only way to stop it would be to have him gentled. "I can't do that to him. I can't. I do not know," she said sadly. Nisura nodded. "No one will poach where you have a claim, but you are going to the tower, and he will make a good husband, once he has been trained. There he is." The women gathered around the entrance to the women's apartments, both inside and out, were all watching three men in the hallway outside. Rand, with his sword buckled over his red coat, was being confronted by Agilmar and Kajin. Neither of them wore a sword. Even after what had happened in the night, these were still the women's apartments. Egwene stopped at the back of the crowd. "You understand why you cannot go in," Agilmar was saying. "I know that things are different in Andor, but you do understand." "I didn't try to go in." Rand sounded as if he had explained all this more than once already. "I told the Lady Nisura I wanted to see Egwene, and she said Egwene was busy and I'd have to wait. All I did was shout for her from the door. I did not try to enter. You'd have thought I was naming the Dark One the way they all started in on me." "Women have their own ways," Kajin said. He was tall for a Shienaran, almost as tall as Rand, lanky and sallow. His topknot was black as pitch. "They set the rules for the women's apartments, and we abide by them even when they are foolish." A number of eyebrows were raised among the women, and he hastily cleared his throat. "You must send a message in if you wish to speak to one of the women, but it will be delivered when they choose, and until it is, you must wait. That is our custom." "I have to see her," Rand said stubbornly. "We're leaving soon. Not soon enough for me, but I still have to see Egwene. We will get the Horn of Valier and the dagger back, and that will be the end of it. The end of it. But I want to see her before I go." Egwene frowned. He sounded odd. "No need to be so fierce," Kajin said. "You and Ingtar will find the horn or not, and if not, then another will retrieve it. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, and we are but threads in the pattern." "Do not let the horn seize you, Rand," Agelmar said. "It can take hold of a man. I know how it can, and that is not the way. A man must seek duty, not glory. What will happen will happen. If the Horn of Valier is meant to be sounded for the light, then it will be." "Here is your Egwene," Kajin said, spotting her. Agelmar looked around and nodded when he saw her with Nisura. "I will leave you in her hands, Rand al'Thor. Remember, here, her words are law, not yours. Lady Nisura, do not be too hard on him. He only wished to see his young woman, and he does not know our ways." Egwene followed Nisura as the Shienaran woman threaded her way through the watching women. Nisura inclined her head briefly to Agelmar and Kajin. She pointedly did not include Rand. Her voice was tight. "Lord Agelmar, Lord Kajin, he should know this much of our ways by now, but he is too big to spank, so I will let Egwene deal with him." Agelmar gave Rand a fatherly pat on the shoulder. "You see, you will speak with her, if not exactly in the way you wished. Come, Kajin, we have much to see to yet. The Amerlin still insists on—" His voice trailed away as he and the other man left. Rand stood there, looking at Egwene. The women were still watching, Egwene realized. Watching her as well as Rand, waiting to see what she would do. "So I'm supposed to deal with him, am I?" Yet she felt her heart going out to him. His hair needed brushing. His face showed anger, defiance, and weariness. "Walk with me," she told him. A murmur started up behind them as he walked down the hall beside her, away from the women's apartments. Rand seemed to be struggling with himself, hunting for what to say. "I've heard about your exploits," she said finally. "Running through the women's apartments last night with a sword, wearing a sword to an audience with the Amerlin seat." He still said nothing, only walked along, frowning at the floor. "She didn't hurt you, did she?" She could not make herself ask if he had been gentled. He looked anything but gentle, but she had no idea what a man looked like afterwards. He gave a jerk. "No,
I know,
she didn't.
boy.
Egwene, the Amerlin—"
Lay down.
He shook his head. "She didn't hurt me." She had the feeling he had been going to say something else entirely. Usually she could ferret out whatever he wanted to hide from her, but when he really wanted to be stubborn, she could more easily dig a brick out of a wall with her fingernails. By the set of his jaw, he was at his most stubborn right now. "What did she want with you, Rand?" "Nothing important. ta'Veren. She wanted to see ta'Veren." His face softened as he looked down
Won't
at
be
her.
much longer, boy.
"What about you, Egwene? Are you all right? Moiraine said you would be, but you were so still. I thought you were dead at first." "Well, I'm not." She laughed. She could not remember anything that had happened after she had asked Matt to go to the dungeons with her, not until waking in her own bed that morning. From what she had heard of the night, she was almost glad she could not remember. "Moiraine said she would have left me a headache for being foolish if she could have healed the rest and not that, but she couldn't." "I told you Fane was dangerous," he muttered. "I told you, but you wouldn't listen." "If that's the way you are going to talk," she said firmly, "I will give you back to Nisura. She won't talk to you the way I am. The last man who tried to push his way into the woman's apartment spent a month up to his elbows in soapy water, helping with the women's laundry, and he was only trying to find his betrothed and make up an argument. At least he knew enough not to wear his sword. The light knows what they do to you. Everybody wants to do something to me, he growled. Everybody wants to use me for something. Well, I won't be used. Once we find the horn and Matt's dagger, I'll never be used again. With an exasperated grunt, she caught his shoulders and made him face her. She glared up at him. If you don't start talking sense, Rand al'Thor, I swear I will box your ears. Now you sound like Nynaeve. He laughed. As he looked down at her, though, his laughter faded. I suppose I'll never see you again. I know you have to go to Tar Valon. I know that. And you'll become an Aes Sedai. I am done with Aes Sedai, Egwene. I won't be a puppet for them. Not for Moiraine or any of them. He looked so lost she wanted to put his head on her shoulder, and so stubborn she really did want to box his ears. Listen to me, you great ox. I am going to be an Aes Sedai, and I'll find a way to help you. I will. The next time you see me, you will likely want to gentle me. She looked around hastily. They were alone in their stretch of the hall. If you don't watch your tongue, I will not be able to help you. Do you want everyone to know? Too many know already, he said. Egwene, I wish things were different, but they aren't. I wish... Take care of yourself, and promise me you won't choose the Red Ajah. Tears blurred her vision as she threw her arms around him. You take care of yourself, she said fiercely into his chest. If you don't, I'll... She thought she heard him murmur, I love you. And then he was firmly unwrapping her arms, gently moving her away from him. He turned and strode away from her, almost running. She jumped when Nisura touched her arm. He looks as if you set him a task he won't enjoy, but you mustn't let him see you cry over it. That negates the purpose. Come, Nynaeve wants you. Scrubbing her cheeks, Egwene followed the other woman. Take care of yourself, you wool-headed lummox.
Alright, everyone.
Take
I'm
care
gonna
of
call
him.
into the stream for tonight. Lay down and see if
Chapter
my back
9.
will stop hurting. but
Leave takings.
I want to thank
The
everyone
outer
for stopping by,
courtyard was
and
in ordered turmoil
everyone
when
who
Rand
continues to
finally
stop
reached
by.
it with his saddlebags and the
I
bundle
definitely
containing the
appreciate all
harp and
y'all's
flute.
support.
The sun climbed